Your heart is racing right now, and you don't even know why. Not because of anything happening in this exact moment. Not because a predator is chasing you. Not because your life is in danger. But somewhere underneath your ribs, your body has been quietly sounding an alarm for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. And you've gotten so used to the noise that you've stopped hearing it. This is the story of what that alarm is actually doing to you. For most of human history, stress meant something simple. A threat appeared. Your body responded. The threat passed. Your body calmed down. That was the whole cycle, start to finish, in minutes. Today, the threat doesn't pass. It just changes shape. An email becomes a deadline, becomes a bill, becomes a fight, becomes a scroll through a feed that makes you feel like you're failing at a life you didn't even choose. And your body, which was built for a world of lions and short bursts of danger, has no idea the threat is supposed to end. So it just keeps ringing the alarm. What happens when an alarm rings for years instead of minutes? That's not a metaphor. That's a physiological question with a very specific, very well-documented answer. And once you understand it, you'll never look at your own tiredness, your own irritability, your own unexplained aches the same way again. Let's start with the alarm system itself. Deep in your brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your body's smoke detector. It doesn't reason. It doesn't weigh evidence. It just detects a possible threat and screams. The moment it screams, a chain reaction fires down through your hypothalamus, into your pituitary gland, and finally down to two small glands sitting on top of your kidneys called the adrenal glands. This entire pathway has a name scientists use constantly, the HPA axis, short for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. All it really means is a communication line from your brain to your hormone system, built for one purpose: get you ready to survive in the next 60 seconds. Within that 60 seconds, your adrenal glands release a flood of chemicals. Adrenaline hits first, and you feel it instantly. Your heart rate spikes. Your pupils widen. Your muscles get a sudden surge of blood, pulled away from places your body considers non-essential in an emergency, like your digestive system. This is why people say their stomach drops when they're scared. It's not a metaphor either. Blood is quite literally being redirected away from your gut in real time. Then comes the second wave, slower but longer lasting. A hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is the one you need to understand because cortisol is the difference between healthy stress and the kind that quietly wrecks you. In the correct dose, at the correct time, cortisol is a gift. It sharpens your focus. It mobilizes energy. It's the reason you can suddenly perform under pressure. Why an athlete can produce a burst of speed in the final seconds of a race. Why you can somehow finish a project the night before it's due. Cortisol, released for minutes or hours and then allowed to fall back down, is one of the most useful chemicals your body makes. The endocrinologist Hans Selye was the first person to map this out scientifically back in the 1930s and 1940s. Selye ran experiments exposing lab animals to various unpleasant conditions and noticed something strange. It didn't matter what the specific stressor was: cold, injury, forced exercise, toxins. The animals' bodies responded with the exact same three-stage pattern every time. He called it the general adaptation syndrome. First, an alarm stage, where the body mobilizes cortisol and adrenaline. Second, a resistance stage, where the body tries to adapt and keep functioning under the ongoing pressure. And third, if the stressor never lets up, an exhaustion stage, where the system starts to break down. Selye's discovery was revolutionary because it proved something that sounds obvious now but wasn't obvious then. Stress isn't really about the specific problem in front of you. It's about how long your body stays in that alarm state. And this is where things go wrong for almost everyone reading, or rather listening to this. Your amygdala, that little smoke detector in your brain, cannot tell the difference between a bear and a bad boss. It cannot tell the difference between a genuine, life-threatening emergency and a string of unread messages, a mortgage payment, a fight with someone you love, or the low hum of financial anxiety that never quite goes away. To your nervous system, all of it registers as the same category of problem: threat, respond, mobilize cortisol. The neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky spent decades studying this exact mismatch, and he summarized it about as clearly as anyone ever has. Zebras, he pointed out, get stressed for exactly as long as the lion is chasing them. Once the chase ends, whether the zebra escaped or didn't, the stress response switches off completely within minutes. The zebra that survives goes right back to grazing, seemingly unbothered, heart rate back to normal, cortisol back to baseline. Human beings do not do this. We ruminate. We replay the argument from this morning at 11 at night. We lie awake mentally rehearsing a conversation that hasn't even happened yet. We can trigger a full stress response just by thinking about a stressful event, or worrying about a stressful event that may never happen at all. Sapolsky's core insight, laid out across decades of research, much of it summarized in his work on stress physiology, is that humans are essentially the only animal capable of turning on a survival response using nothing but a thought. That means your body can be flooded with stress hormones while you're sitting completely still on a couch. No lion, no danger, just a memory, or a worry, or a notification. Now picture what that does over the span of months, years. This is where the concept of allostatic load comes in, a term coined by the neuroscientist Bruce McEwen. Allostasis is your body's process of maintaining stability through change, constantly adjusting your internal systems to meet demands. Allostatic load is what happens when that adjustment process is asked to run too often, for too long, without enough recovery in between. It's the cumulative wear and tear of a stress system that never fully powers down. Let's walk through what that wear and tear actually looks like, system by system, because this is the part almost nobody explains clearly. Start with your cardiovascular system. Every stress response raises your blood pressure and heart rate, temporarily, which is fine in isolation. But chronic activation means chronically elevated blood pressure, and elevated blood pressure over years is one of the strongest predictors of heart disease and stroke on the planet. One of the most famous demonstrations of this comes from something called the Whitehall Studies, led by the epidemiologist Michael Marmot, tracking thousands of British civil servants over decades. Marmot found something the researchers didn't initially expect. It wasn't the highest ranking, most overworked executives who had the worst cardiovascular health. It was the lowest ranking employees, the ones with the least control over their own schedules and workloads. Chronic stress, it turned out, wasn't primarily about how much was on your plate. It was about how much control you felt you had over what was on your plate. Low control, combined with high demand, was the most damaging combination of all, and it showed up in the data as measurably higher rates of heart disease among workers with the least autonomy. Next, your immune system. In a short burst, cortisol actually suppresses inflammation, which is useful because in an emergency, your body doesn't want to waste resources on a slow healing process like fighting a cold. But under chronic stress, your immune cells start to lose sensitivity to cortisol's signal entirely, almost like they stop listening. The result is counterintuitive. Chronic stress doesn't just weaken your immune system in a simple way. It creates a strange combination of increased inflammation throughout your body alongside a reduced ability to fight off actual infections. This is part of why people under prolonged stress get sick more often, heal from wounds more slowly, and show elevated markers of chronic inflammation that are now linked to heart disease, diabetes, and even certain cancers. Then there's your gut. Remember that blood being redirected away from your digestive system during a stress response? Under chronic stress, your gut is essentially in a permanent state of low-level shutdown, which is a major reason chronic stress is so tightly linked to symptoms like bloating, irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux, and appetite changes that swing in both directions, some people losing their appetite entirely, others stress eating compulsively. Your gut also contains an enormous network of neurons, sometimes called the enteric nervous system, in near constant communication with your brain. This is the actual biological basis of that phrase people use so casually, a gut feeling. There's another layer to this most people never think about: your metabolism. Cortisol's original job, biologically, was to get glucose into your bloodstream fast, fuel for a fight or a sprint. Under chronic stress, your body keeps doing this, over and over, releasing sugar into your blood that never actually gets burned off by a fight or a sprint. Because there is no fight, there is no sprint, just a stressful meeting or a stressful thought. Over time, your cells can become less responsive to insulin, the hormone responsible for clearing that sugar out of your bloodstream, a condition researchers call insulin resistance, an early warning sign for type 2 diabetes. At the same time, chronically elevated cortisol tends to specifically encourage fat storage around your abdomen, a pattern strongly linked to the exact same cardiovascular risks discussed earlier. This is part of why chronic stress and weight gain are so tightly, frustratingly linked, and why willpower alone rarely solves it. Your hormones, not just your habits, are working against you. And it doesn't stop with fat storage. Stress also hijacks your appetite signals directly. Ghrelin, the hormone that makes you feel hungry, rises under chronic stress, particularly cravings for calorie-dense, sugary, or fatty food, because on some ancient level, your body is trying to stockpile energy reserves in preparation for a famine that, again, is never actually coming. This is why stress eating isn't a character flaw. It's your endocrine system doing precisely what it evolved to do, just aimed at the wrong kind of threat. Now let's talk about sleep, because sleep is where all of this compounds on itself. Deep, restorative sleep depends on your cortisol levels dropping low enough, for long enough, to let a different set of processes take over, the ones responsible for clearing waste from your brain, consolidating memories, and repairing tissue throughout your body. Chronic stress interferes with this in a very specific way. It doesn't just make it harder to fall asleep, it fragments the architecture of the sleep itself, cutting into a stage called slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative stage, and a stage called REM sleep, heavily tied to emotional processing. Researchers studying this, including work built on the foundations laid by sleep scientist William Dement, have found that people under chronic stress often spend more time in lighter stages of sleep and wake more frequently throughout the night, even if they don't consciously remember waking up. The result is someone who technically slept 8 hours and still wakes up exhausted, because the quality of that sleep, not just the quantity, was compromised by a nervous system that never fully stood down. And here's the cruel part of the loop. Poor sleep itself raises cortisol the following day, which makes the next night's sleep worse, which raises cortisol further. Chronic stress and poor sleep don't just coexist, they actively feed each other, spiraling in the same direction, night after night, until exhaustion starts to feel like a permanent personality trait instead of a physiological state. Now, your brain itself. This might be the most sobering part. Bruce McEwen's research, along with decades of follow-up studies, found that chronic exposure to elevated cortisol can physically shrink a region of your brain called the hippocampus, the structure primarily responsible for forming new memories and regulating emotional response. At the same time, chronic stress appears to do the opposite to your amygdala, that original smoke detector. It grows more reactive, more easily triggered, more prone to false alarms. Picture what that combination means practically. A hippocampus that struggles to properly file away and contextualize your experiences, paired with an amygdala that's become a hair trigger. That is very literally a recipe for anxiety that feels disproportionate to your actual circumstances. Because your threat detection system has been physically remodeled to expect danger. And this remodeling doesn't stop at the level of organs and tissue. It goes down to the level of your cells. In the early 2000s, the psychologist Elissa Epel, working alongside the molecular biologist Elizabeth Blackburn, studied mothers caring for chronically ill children, a population under sustained, unrelenting stress. They looked at something called telomeres, the small protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes, often compared to the plastic tips on the end of a shoelace that keep it from fraying. Telomeres naturally shorten as you age. It's a normal biological clock. What Epel and Blackburn found was that the mothers under the highest chronic stress had telomeres that looked, on a cellular level, up to a decade older than their actual age. Chronic stress wasn't just making these women feel older. It appeared to be accelerating the aging process at a molecular level. This research was significant enough that Blackburn would go on to share a Nobel Prize for related work on telomeres. Sit with that for a second. Not a metaphor about stress aging you. Actual measurable cellular evidence. There's one more piece of research worth understanding. because it explains why the exact same stressful event can devastate one person and barely touch another. It comes back to that idea Michael Marmot uncovered in the Whitehall Studies: control. But there's a second factor researchers have found matters just as much, sometimes more: social support. Studies going back decades, including foundational work by the psychologist John Castle in the 1970s, found that people facing significant stress alongside strong social connection showed dramatically better health outcomes than people facing the same level of stress in isolation. Later research gave this effect a name: social buffering. The presence of a trusted person, even just sitting quietly nearby during a stressful event, has been shown in controlled studies to measurably blunt the cortisol response. Your nervous system, it turns out, is constantly scanning not just for threats, but for allies. And the mere presence of an ally changes how dangerous your brain judges a threat to be at a hormonal level in real time. This is likely a big part of why loneliness itself functions as a chronic stressor. It isn't just an emotional state. Research linking social isolation to elevated inflammatory markers and cardiovascular risk suggests loneliness activates the exact same physiological alarm system as any other unresolved threat, quietly in the background, day after day. So let's reconstruct what this actually looks like in a life, because these facts on their own can feel abstract until you picture them as a lived experience. Picture someone who wakes up already tired because their sleep was shallow, fragmented by a mind that wouldn't fully quiet down. Cortisol is supposed to naturally spike shortly after waking, giving you that jolt of morning alertness. But in someone under chronic stress, this rhythm often gets flattened or shifted. So the jolt either doesn't come or comes at the wrong time, like a spike of wired anxiety at 11 at night instead of calm focus at 8 in the morning. They check their phone before they're even out of bed, and the first stress trigger of the day has already fired before their feet hit the floor. At work, meetings stack on meetings. Their body is producing small cortisol spikes throughout the day, dozens of them, each one modest on its own, none of them ever fully given the chance to return to baseline before the next one hits. By evening, they feel wired but exhausted, a state so common it has its own casual name: tired and wired. The nervous system too activated to properly rest, but too depleted to feel genuinely energized. They eat dinner quickly, half paying attention, because a suppressed digestive system doesn't send strong hunger or fullness signals the way a calm one does. They scroll a screen before bed, which delivers a steady trickle of small novel stimuli, each one a tiny dopamine and cortisol event, and wonder why, lying in the dark, their mind won't stop replaying the day. This person is not weak. This person is not failing at managing their emotions. This person's body is doing exactly what a human body under sustained allostatic load is built to do. The dysfunction isn't a personal flaw. It's a fully predictable outcome of a stress response system, forged over hundreds of thousands of years to handle brief resolvable emergencies, now being asked to run continuously against threats that never fully resolve. Here is the counterintuitive twist: the part that changes how you should think about all of this. The goal was never to eliminate stress. That's actually the wrong target entirely, and chasing it will make you feel like you're failing at something impossible, because a small amount of acute stress is not just harmless, it's beneficial. Psychologists distinguish between what they call eustress, a manageable, even energizing form of pressure, like the nerves before a performance that actually sharpen your focus, and distress, the chronic, unresolved kind that erodes you over time. The problem was never that your body has a stress response. The problem is that the modern world almost never gives that response the one thing it was designed around from the very beginning: a clear ending. Your nervous system doesn't need zero stress. It needs completion. It needs a recognizable physical signal that the threat is over, so it can flip the switch back to rest and repair. For your ancestors, that signal was often built directly into the event itself. You ran from the danger, and the physical act of running burned through the stress hormones, and then your body naturally settled. You fought, or you didn't have to, and either way, your body got the message. Modern stressors almost never come with that built-in ending. An anxious email doesn't get resolved by running. a worry about your finances, doesn't have a clear finish line you can physically feel. So the hormones get released over and over with no outlet, and no signal ever arrives telling your body it's safe to stand down. This is why the research consistently points to physical movement as one of the single most effective tools for interrupting chronic stress, not because exercise is some kind of moral virtue, but because it's the most direct way to give your body back the completion signal it's been missing. It's also why deliberate slow breathing works, because it directly stimulates a countervailing system in your body called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is essentially the biological off switch to the stress response's on switch. And it's why genuine, unhurried social connection, the kind where you actually feel safe and seen by another person, reliably lowers cortisol. Because for nearly all of human history, safety was never something you achieved alone. It was something confirmed by the presence of other people around you. So here's the mirror, the part where all of this points back at your own life. That tightness in your chest, you've stopped noticing because it's been there so long you assume it's just how you are now. That's not who you are. That's a smoke detector that's been going off for months without a fire, physically reshaping your brain, your gut, your immune system, and the very ends of your chromosomes. All because the modern world keeps handing your ancient alarm system problems it was never built to solve on its own, and rarely gives it the clean physical ending it needs to finally switch off. You are not broken for feeling exhausted by a life that never seems to let up. You are running an operating system built for sprints on a treadmill that never stops. The difference between the people who quietly burn out and the people who don't is very rarely the amount of stress in their lives. It's whether they've found a way to give their body a genuine felt ending. A walk, a conversation, a breath held and released, slow and deliberate, again and again, until the body finally believes the danger has passed. Your heart is racing right now, and now you know exactly why.